Scholastic Audio presents Spirit Animals, Book 1, Wild Born, by Brandon Mull, read by Nicola Barber. Chapter 1. Briggan. Given a choice, Connor would not have picked to spend the most important birthday of his life helping Devin Trunswick get dressed. In all honesty, he would not have volunteered to help Devin Trunswick do anything, ever. But Devin was the eldest son of Eric, the Earl of Trunswick, and Connor was the third son of Fenray, herder of sheep. Fenray had incurred debts to the Earl, and Connor was helping to work them off as a servant to Devin. The arrangement had begun over a year ago, and was set to last at least 2 more. Connor had to hook each fiddly clasp on the back of Devin's coat correctly, or the folds would hang crooked, and he would hear about it for weeks. The fine material was more decorative than practical. If caught in a storm, Connor knew that Devin would wish for a simpler, more durable coat, one without clasps, one that might actually keep him warm. "Are you done fussing around back there?" Devin asked in exasperation. "Sorry for the delay, my lord," Connor replied. "There are 48 clasps. I'm just now linking the 40th. "How many more days will this take? I'm about to die of old age. Are you just inventing numbers?" Connor resisted a sharp reply. Having grown up counting sheep, he probably knew his numbers better than Devin. But arguing with a noble caused more trouble than it was worth. Sometimes Devin seemed to deliberately tempt him. "It's my best guess." The door flew open, and Dawson, Devin's younger brother, burst into the room. "Are you still getting dressed, Devin?" "Don't blame me," Devin protested. "Connor keeps napping." Connor only gave Dawson a brief glance. The sooner he finished the clasps, the sooner he could get himself ready. "How could Connor fall asleep?" Dawson called, giggling. "Everything you say, brother, is so interesting." Connor resisted a grin. Dawson seldom stopped talking. He often got annoying, but he could sometimes be pretty funny. "I'm awake." "Aren't you done yet?" Devin complained. "How many are left?" Connor wanted to say 20. 5. "Think you'll summon a spirit animal, Devin?" Dawson asked. "I don't see why not," Devin replied. "Grandfather called a mongoose. Father produced a lynx." Today was the Trunswick Nectar Ceremony. In less than an hour, the local children who turned 11 this month would each try to call a spirit animal. Connor knew that some families tended to form bestial bonds more regularly than others. Even so, calling a spirit animal was never guaranteed, no matter what your family name. There were only 3 kids scheduled to drink the nectar, and the odds were against any of them succeeding. It was certainly nothing to boast about before it happened. "What animal do you think you'll get?" Dawson wondered. "Your guess is as good as mine," Devin said. "What do you expect?" "A chipmunk," Dawson predicted. Devin lunged at his brother, who scampered away, giggling. Dawson was not dressed as formally as his older brother, which allowed him freer movement. Still, Devin soon caught him and tackled him to the floor, pinning him down. "A bear would be more likely," Devin said, grinding his elbow into his brother's chest. "Or a wildcat, like father. First thing I'll do is have it taste you." Connor tried to wait patiently. It wasn't his place to intervene. "You might get nothing," Dawson said bravely. "Then all I'll be is Earl of Trunswick and your master. Not if father outlives you." "I'd mind my tongue, second son." "I'm glad I'm not you." Devin twisted Dawson's nose until he yelped, then stood up, brushing off his trousers.
At least my nose isn't sore."
"Connor will drink the nectar too," Dawson cried. "Maybe he'll be the one to call a spirit animal."
Connor tried to look invisible. Did he hope to summon a spirit animal? Of course. Who wouldn't? You couldn't help hoping. Just because nobody in his family had done it since some obscure great-granduncle decades ago didn't make it impossible.
"Right," Devin chuckled. "And I suppose the Smith's daughter will summon one as well."
"You never know,"
Dawson said, sitting up and rubbing his nose.
"Connor, what would you like to have?"
Connor stared at the floor. He had been asked a direct question by a noble, so he had to answer.
"I've always gotten on well with dogs. I'd like a sheepdog, I guess." "What an imagination," Devin laughed. "The sheep herder dreams of calling a sheepdog."
"A dog would be fun," Dawson said.
"And common," Devin said. "How many dogs do you have, Connor?"
"My family. 10, last I counted."
"How long since you've seen your family?" Dawson asked.
Connor tried to keep his voice even.
"More than half a year. They'll be there today?" "I expect they'll try. It depends on whether they can get away."
In case they couldn't make it, he didn't want to show that he cared.
"How novel for you," Devin sniffed. "How many clasps remain?"
3.
Devin turned around.
"Let's not dawdle. We're running late."
An impressive assemblage had gathered in the square. It was not every day that the son of a great lord quested for his spirit animal. Commoners and nobles alike had come for the event, old, young, and in between. Musicians played, soldiers strutted, and a peddler sold candied nuts. A grandstand had been erected for the Earl and his family. Connor thought it looked as if a holiday had been declared. A holiday for everyone but him. The day was cool and clear. The green hills where Connor would rather be roaming loomed far beyond the blue rooftops and chimneys of Trunswick. Connor had attended a few nectar ceremonies. He had never witnessed the calling of a spirit animal, although he knew it had happened several times in this square during his lifetime. There had been little pageantry at the ceremonies he had seen. None had been well attended, and none had involved so many animals. A common belief held that bringing together a variety of animals increased the chance of summoning a spirit animal. If so, Devin might be in luck. Not only were many domestic animals present, but Connor saw mews full of birds with exotic plumage, a corral containing deer and moose, several caged wildcats, a penned trio of badgers, and a black bear chained to a post by an iron collar. There was even a beast that Connor had only heard about in stories, a huge camel with 2 furry humps. As Connor walked toward the center of the square, the hordes of onlookers made him self-conscious. He wasn't sure what to do with his hands. Should he fold his arms or let them dangle at his sides? As he scanned the intimidating crowd, he tried to remember that most eyes were fixed on Devin. Suddenly, Connor noticed his mother waving. His elder brothers stood beside her, and his father. They had even brought Soldier, Connor's favorite sheepdog. They had all made it. The sight of them thawed some of his fear and awoke a longing for home, meadows to wander, creeks to swim in, groves to explore. His work had been honest and outdoors, chopping wood, shearing sheep, feeding dogs. Their home had been small but cozy, and nothing like the drafty immensity of the Earl's castle. Connor gave his mother a little wave. The future Earl of Trunswick led the way to a bench near the centre of the square. Abby, the smith's daughter, awaited them, sitting still and looking overwhelmed. She was clearly dressed in her best clothes, which were laughably inferior to even the most casual dress owned by Devin's mother or sister. Connor knew he must also look very plain beside Devin. A pair of green cloaks stood before the bench. Connor recognized the woman, Isilla, her greying hair gathered up in a glittering net over her pale face. Her goldfinch, Frida, was perched on her shoulder. Isilla normally officiated at the nectar ceremonies. She had given the nectar to both of his brothers. The other green cloak was a stranger, tall and lean, with wide shoulders and features as weathered as his cloak. His skin was darker than the people around him, as if he came from northeastern Nilo or southwestern Zhong, an unusual sight in the middle of Yura. His animal was not evident, but Connor noticed a hint of a tattoo winding away into his sleeve. The sight gave him a thrill. It meant the stranger's spirit animal was currently hibernating on his arm. Abby rose and curtsied as Devon approached the bench. He sat down and motioned for Connor to follow his lead. Connor and Abby sat. Isilla raised her hands to still the crowd. The stranger backed away, leaving her the center of attention. Connor wondered why the man had come. As with the rest of the pageantry, Connor decided it must be another nod to Devon's high status. Isilla began in a penetrating voice, "Hear ye, good people of Trunswick. Before the eyes of man and beast, we are gathered here today to participate in the most sacred rite in all of Erdus. When human and animal unite, their greatness is multiplied. We have come to witness whether the nectar will reveal such greatness in any of these three candidates: Lord Devon Trunswick, Abby, daughter of Grawl, and Connor, son of Fenray." The cheering after the mention of Devon all but drowned out the other two names. Connor tried to remain impassive. If he sat still and kept calm, soon it would be over. Devon would drink the nectar first, in the place of honor. Common belief held that the first to drink the nectar in a ceremony was the most likely to call a spirit animal. Isilla bent over to raise a plugged flask, the leather tooled with intricate designs. After raising the flask above her head to display it to the assemblage, she unstopped it. "Devon Trunswick, come forward." The crowd whistled and clapped as Devon approached Isilla, then quieted down as she put her finger to her lips. Devon knelt before her, a sight Connor had seldom seen. Yuran nobles only knelt to greater Yuran nobles. The green cloaks knelt to none. "Receive the nectar of Ninani." Connor could not help but feel excited as the flask tipped toward Devon's lips. This might be the first time he witnessed a spirit animal summoned from the unknown. With all of these animals present, how could the nectar fail? Connor wondered what the beast would look like. Devon swallowed. Isilla stepped back. A deep hush fell over the square. Eyes closed, Devon tilted his face skyward. An empty moment passed. Somebody coughed. Nothing out of the ordinary was happening. Perplexed, Devon looked around. Connor had heard that a spirit animal either came right after the nectar was tasted, or never. Devon arose and turned in a full circle, eyes roving. There was no sign of anything appearing nearby. The crowd began to murmur. Isilla hesitated, considering the grandstand. Connor followed her gaze. The Earl sat grimly on his throne, his lynx nearby. Although he had summoned a spirit animal, he had chosen not to wear the green cloak. Isilla glanced back at the foreign green cloak, who gave a faint nod. "Thank you, Devon," she intoned. "Abby, daughter of Grawl, come forward." Devon looked queasy. His eyes were blank, but his posture betrayed his humiliation. He glanced furtively toward his father, then looked down. When he lifted his eyes again, His gaze had hardened, the shame turning to fury. Connor looked away. It would be best to avoid Devin's attention for a while. Abby drank, and, as Connor expected, nothing happened. She returned to the bench.
"Connor, son of Fenray, come forward."
Hearing his name called gave Connor a nervous thrill. If Devin had failed to call an animal, Connor doubted he had any chance. Still, anything could happen. Never had so many eyes been trained just on him. Rising to his feet, Connor tried to ignore the crowd by focusing on Isila. The tactic didn't really work. If nothing else, it would be interesting to discover what the nectar tasted like. His oldest brother had compared it to sour goat's milk, but Wallace liked to tease. His other brother, Garin, had likened it to apple cider. Connor licked his lips. Whatever the taste, sampling the nectar would officially mark the end of his childhood. Connor knelt before Isila. She looked down at him with a strange smile, curiosity lurking behind her eyes. Had she stared at the others this way?
"Receive the nectar of Ninani."
Connor put his lips to the offered flask. The nectar was thick, like syrup, and richly sweet, like fruit in honey. The consistency became more liquid once it was in his mouth. He swallowed. It tasted amazing, better than anything he had ever tried. Isila withdrew the flask before he could steal another sip. One swallow was all he would ever sample. Connor stood in order to return to the bench, and a burning, tingling sensation spread through his chest. Animals began to cry out. The birds shrilled. The wildcats yowled. The bear roared. The moose trumpeted. The camel snorted and stomped. The ground began to tremble. The sky darkened, as if a swift cloud had overtaken the sun. A brilliant flash pierced the gloom like lightning, but much nearer than any lightning Connor had experienced, nearer even than the time he saw a tree struck at the crest of a hill he was climbing. Onlookers gasped and murmured. Dazzled by the flash, Connor blinked repeatedly to restore his vision. Hot tingles spread from his chest along his limbs. Despite the oddness of the moment, he felt irrationally joyful. And then he saw the wolf. Much like any sheep herder in the region, Connor had experience with wolves. Wolf packs had stolen many sheep under his care. Wolves had killed 3 of his favorite dogs over the years. Livestock lost to wolves was a big part of the reason his father had become indebted to the Earl. And of course, there was that night 2 years ago, when Connor and his brothers had stood against a brazen pack that had tried to steal sheep out of their pen in the high pasture. Now, the largest wolf he had ever seen stood before him, head held high. It was a remarkable creature, long-limbed, well-fed, with the most luxurious coat of grey-white fur Connor could have imagined. He took in large paws, keen claws, savage teeth, and striking cobalt blue eyes. Blue eyes! In the history of Erdas, only one wolf had such deep blue eyes. Connor glanced at the Euron flag hanging from the Earl's grandstand. Briggan the wolf, patron beast of Eura, stood depicted upon a rich blue banner, eyes shrewd and piercing. The wolf padded forward calmly, stopping directly before Connor. It sat like a trained dog yielding to its master. Its head came well above Connor's waist. Muscles tense, Connor resisted the impulse to leap away. Under other circumstances, he would have run from this animal or yelled at it. He would have thrown rocks or grabbed a stout staff to defend himself. But this was no chance encounter out in the wild. His whole body was tingling, almost vibrating, and hundreds of people were watching. This wolf had appeared out of nowhere. The wolf stared up at him with confidence. Though large and fierce, the animal seemed very much in control of itself. Connor was awed that a predator such as this would show him so much respect. Those blue eyes hinted at a greater understanding than any animal should possess. The wolf was waiting for something. Connor held out a trembling hand, and the wolf's warm pink tongue caressed his palm. The touch was electric, and the tingling in Connor's chest immediately ceased. For an instant, Connor felt courage and clarity and an alertness like he had never known. He smelled the wolf with enhanced senses and somehow knew it was male and that it considered him an equal. Then, the strange moment of expanded perception passed. In spite of the abundant evidence, it was the look on Devin Trunswick's face that brought home to Connor what had transpired. Never had Connor been the focus of such naked rage and envy. He had summoned a spirit animal. And not just any spirit animal. A wolf. Nobody summoned wolves. Briggan the wolf had been one of the great beasts, and spirit animals were never the same species as the great beasts. Everyone knew that. It simply didn't happen. Yet it had. Undeniably, inexplicably, it had. A full-grown wolf was nuzzling Connor's palm. A wolf with deep blue eyes. The bewildered crowd kept silent. The Earl leaned forward attentively. Devin seethed, and Dawson's mouth was spread in an astonished grin. The stranger in the green cloak approached and took Connor's hand. "I am Tariq," the man said in a low voice. "I came a long way to find you. Stay near me, and I will let no harm befall you. I won't press you to take our vows until you're ready, but you need to hear me out. Much depends on you." Connor nodded numbly. It was all too much to digest. The foreign green cloak raised Connor's hand high and spoke in a powerful voice. "Good people of Trunswick, news of this day will echo across all of Erdas. In our hour of need, Briggan has returned." Chapter 2. Uraza. Staying low, Abeka stalked through the tall grass, moving at a slow, steady pace. She stepped carefully, as her father had taught her, advancing in silence. Sudden motion or sounds would send her prey running. If this one got away, she wouldn't have time to approach another. The antelope lowered its head to nibble at the grass. It was young, but she knew that it could easily outrun her. If it bounded away, she would return empty-handed. Coming to a standstill, Abeka eased an arrow to the string of her bow. As she pulled it back, the bow creaked. The antelope abruptly looked up. The arrow flew true, skewering the beast's heart and lungs from the side. The antelope staggered only briefly, before collapsing. This antelope would matter to Abeka's village. The drought had made food scarce, and since it showed no sign of relenting, every morsel counted. Abeka knelt beside the fallen animal and spoke in a soft voice. "I'm sorry for taking your life, friend. Our village needs your meat. I got in close and made a clean shot so you wouldn't suffer. Please forgive me." Abeka glanced at the bright sky. The sun had moved more than she had realized. How long had she stalked her prey? Fortunately, she had found game that was small enough to carry. Abeka slung the antelope over her shoulders and started home. The sun glared down at the baked brown plain. The brush was dry and brittle, the shrubs withered and thirsty. A few lonely baobab trees stood in the distance, trunks thick, branches sprawling, blurred by shimmering ripples of heat. Abeka kept her eyes and ears open. People were not the prey of choice for big cats, but that became less certain when food grew scarce. And big cats were not the only dangerous animals roaming the Niloan savannah. Anyone who ventured beyond the village palisade took a risk. The farther Abeka walked, the heavier the antelope seemed. But she was tall for her age and had always been strong, and she was excited to show her prize to her father. She tried to ignore the hot sun. In her village, the men normally did the hunting. Women rarely ventured out alone. What a surprise this antelope would be! What a perfect way to commemorate her 11th name day. Her sister Soma might be more beautiful, she might sing and dance better, she might weave better, she might even be a more gifted artisan. But she had never made a kill. Just over a year ago, Soma had presented the village with a beaded tapestry on her 11th name day, depicting herons in flight over a pond. Many had remarked that it was the most impressive work they had seen from a young artist. But could they eat it in a famine? Would the beaded pond cure their thirst? Would the fake herons ease the pains of their hunger? Abeka could not resist a smile. To her knowledge, no child had ever brought game as a name day gift. Did the village need another decorative jar? To hold what water? Her gift would serve a purpose. To avoid being spotted by the lookouts, Abeka approached her village stealthily. She entered how she had exited, through the damaged slats in the side of the wall facing the ravine. There was some tricky climbing involved, made no easier by the carcass on her shoulders, but Abeka succeeded. Time was short. Ignoring the stares of her neighbours, Abeka hurried to her home. Like most of the other dwellings in her village, her rondavel had a round base with stone walls and a conical thatched roof. When she burst inside, she found Soma waiting, looking gorgeous in an orange wrap and a beaded scarf. Abeka was not bad-looking herself, but had long ago lost the contest of beauty to her sister. In any case, she favoured more practical clothing and braids that could be tied back.
"Abeka,"
Soma said.
"Where have you been? Does father know you're back?"
"I went hunting," Abeka explained proudly, the antelope still resting on her shoulders.
"Alone? You went outside, past the gate?
Where else would I get an antelope?" Soma put a brown hand over her eyes.
"Abeka, why must you be so strange? You vanished. Father was worried. You're late for your bonding ritual."
"It'll be all right," Abeka assured her sister. "I'll hurry. I'm not as fussy as you. Nobody will complain once they see my fine kill." Behind Abeka, the door opened. She turned and looked up at her father, a tall man, lean and muscular, with a shaved head. His eyes were not friendly.
"Abeka, Chinwe told me you had returned. I was preparing a group to go search for you."
"I wanted to offer a fine name day gift," Abeka explained. "I brought home this antelope." Breathing heavily, her father closed his eyes. He could barely keep control of his tone.
"Abeka, today is important. You are late. You are covered in dust and blood. Your disappearance has put the village in an uproar. Have you no sense? Have you no dignity?"
Abeka withered inside, her pride dissolving, her happiness spoiling. For a moment she could find no reply. Tears threatened to fall. "But I came to no harm. You know how well I hunt. This was a surprise." Her father shook his head.
"This was selfishness, wrong-headedness. You cannot offer the antelope as your name day gift. It is evidence of your misbehavior. What would it say about you, about us? What lesson will it teach other children? You will offer the jar you made.
But the jar is ugly, Abeka said desperately. An ape could make a better one. I have no talent there.
You make no effort there, her father said. Returning alive with a kill shows skill, but it also shows poor judgment. We will discuss a punishment later. Make yourself ready. I will go tell the others that we will have your bonding ritual after all. Let Soma help you. If you would look to her example, you would disgrace us less.
Abeka felt desolate. Yes, father. After her father left, Abeka unslung the antelope from her shoulders and set it down. Now that she was paying attention, she saw that her father was right. She was covered in dust and blood. She stared flatly at her fine kill. It had become a trophy of shame. Abeka could barely restrain her tears. Today was supposed to be her day, her one day. Everything was always about Soma. How thoughtful she was, how lovely, how talented. Today Abeka would drink the nectar of Ninani. Would she call a spirit animal? Probably not. But today she became a woman, a true citizen of the village, and she had wanted to contribute a special gift. Abeka wished for her mother. Her mother had understood her better than anyone, but her mother had never been strong and had been taken by sickness. Finally surrendering, Abeka started to weep. "No time for that," Soma ordered. "You're late, and you look bad enough already." Gritting her teeth, Abeka fought her emotions. Did she want her sister to see her cry? "What should I do?" Soma crossed to her and wiped the tears from her cheeks. "On second thought, maybe you should cry. We don't have enough water to wash you." "I'm done crying. Let's get you clean." Abeka became as passive as a doll. She didn't complain about the scratchy brushes or the barely damp cloth. She didn't offer any opinions about her outfit or her accessories. Abeka let Soma arrange everything and tried not to look at her antelope. When Abeka emerged, she found the whole village waiting. After all, today was her day. Starting at her door, everyone stood in 2 long lines, forming a pathway. Abeka had looked forward to this. It had been fun to do it for others. Her father stared at her sternly, as did most of the other men. Some of the women observed her with disgust, others with pity. A few of her younger acquaintances snickered. Abeka walked between the people of her village, keenly aware of how she had disappointed them. She wished she could run away and get eaten by a lion. Instead, she clutched the awful jug at her side, held her head high and kept walking. The wind had risen, blowing dust. A cloud muted the sun. Abeka did not smile. She kept her expression neutral. Abeka followed the winding path of people. After she passed, the lines behind her collapsed as everyone followed her to her destination. Up ahead, Abeka spotted Chinwe. Standing beyond the end of the path, she wore the green cloak only brought out for bonding rituals, draped casually over one shoulder. The tattoo of her wildebeest was visible on her thin, bare leg. As Abeka approached, Chinwe started chanting. The villagers echoed each phrase using the old tribal language. Abeka didn't know what most of the words meant, and neither did the others, but it was tradition. When Abeka reached Chinwe, she knelt, feeling the gritty dirt beneath her bare knees. Still chanting, Chinwe dipped a small bowl into a large vessel and gazed down at Abeka. She didn't look angry or disapproving. She looked the same as she did during any bonding ritual, relaxed and maybe a little bored. Chinwe offered the bowl and Abeka accepted it. There was only a little fluid at the bottom, colourless like water, but thicker. She drank it. The nectar tasted like unheated soup, the kind her mother used to make with crushed nuts. It was sweeter, but otherwise strikingly similar. The taste brought tears to Abeka's eyes. Handing the bowl back, Abeka looked up at Chinwe curiously. Had that really been the nectar? Or had Chinwe replaced the nectar with root and nut soup? Chinwe took the bowl from Abeka and kept chanting. Abeka felt unsteady, sort of dizzy and charged. Did everyone have this reaction? Her senses reached wide. She caught the vivid smell of rain on the wind. She could single out each individual chanting voice and could tell who was off pitch. She could even hear her father and her sister. The sky rumbled and darkened. The chanting broke off as everyone looked upward. Only once had Abeka seen a spirit animal called. Hanno had done it, the grandnephew of the old rain dancer. Abeka had been 6 at the time, but she didn't recall any thunder. A soft glow had appeared behind Hanno, and an anteater had ambled out of the radiance. There was nothing soft about this light. A dazzling column blazed into existence, more intense than a bonfire, casting long shadows around the village. Several people shrieked. When the light disappeared, a leopard remained. Buzzing from head to toe, Abeka stared in wonder. The leopard was large and sleek, almost the size of a lion. Her glossy hide was flawless. Out in the wild, standing this close to such a cat would have been the last thing Abeka ever did. Nobody spoke. Muscles churning under her pelt, the great leopard walked to Abeka with liquid grace and nuzzled her leg. Upon contact, the charge throughout Abeka's body vanished. Acting on reflex, Abeka coiled slightly. The village suddenly seemed foreign and confining. She needed to get away. What if she jumped? She had the impression that if she desired, she could spring onto the nearest rooftop. She wanted to run free on the savannah, to prowl and hunt and climb. The leopard rubbed against her hip and brought her back from the bewildering rush of instincts. Abeka straightened, hardly able to believe what was happening. The animal beside her could kill her with a single bite. "It looks like Uraza," a child said, breaking the silence. The comment started a wave of murmurs. The leopard prowled a few paces away from Abeka, almost as if uninterested, but then looked back. The cat did look like Uraza. She even had those legendary violet eyes, flashy as amethysts. But that was impossible. People didn't summon leopards. Cheetahs maybe, but never leopards or lions, let alone leopards with violet eyes. Thunder grumbled overhead, and rain began to fall. What started gently soon became a downpour. People tilted their heads skyward, mouths open, arms extended. The crowd offered up laughter and joyful exclamations. A hand gripped Abeka's wrist. It was Chinwe. She wore a rare smile. "I believe we have found our new rain dancer." The old rain dancer had died more than 2 years ago. Rain had not fallen on the village of Okaihi since. A few little storms had come close, but not a drop had landed within their walls. Several of the reliable wells had dried up. There had been much debate about how they would break the curse. "A rain dancer?" Abeka marveled. "It would be difficult to argue against it," Chinwe said. Abeka's father approached, eyeing the leopard warily. "We should get indoors." Abeka squinted at him through the downpour. "Can you believe this?" "Truly, I cannot." He seemed distant. Was he still angry with her? "Your daughter has ended our drought," Chinwe said. "So it would appear." "And she has summoned a leopard, perhaps the leopard." Her father nodded pensively. "The lost guardian of Nilo. What does this mean, Chinwe?" "I don't know," Chinwe said. "It goes against—"
I'll have to consult someone who sees more deeply. Her father considered the leopard. Is it safe? Chinua shrugged. As safe as any wild thing can be. It's her spirit animal. Her father regarded Abeka, droplets bombarding his bald head. The rain is making up for lost time. Come. Jogging after her father, her fancy wrap soaked, Abeka tried to understand why he seemed displeased. Are you disappointed? She ventured. He stopped and gripped her shoulders, heedless of the rain. I am confounded. I should be happy that you summoned an animal, but you have called a leopard. And not just any leopard, one that resembles our legendary guardian. In good ways and bad, you have always been different. And now this tops all of it. Will your beast bring good or evil upon you, upon us? I don't know what to think. The leopard gave a low growl, not terribly threatening, but not pleased either. Abeka's father turned and led the way to their home. The leopard followed behind. When they reached the front door, they found a stranger waiting. He wore Yoran clothing, boots, trousers, and a lavish blue cloak with the hood raised against the rain. The hood obscured his face. Abeka's father stopped near him. Who are you? I'm called Zarif, the man replied in a lively voice. I journeyed here from afar. Your daughter has accomplished the impossible, as was foretold weeks ago by Umaris the Inscrutable, one of the wisest women in all of Erdos. What happened today will reshape the world. I'm here to help. Then enter, her father said. I am Pujalo. The three of them went through the doorway. The leopard followed smoothly. Soma awaited them, her outfit damp but not soaked. She must have hurried indoors. There it is, she said, cautious eyes on the leopard. Am I dreaming? Isn't she amazing? Abeka said, hoping her sister would be impressed. The leopard briefly sniffed the room, then crouched beside Abeka. Stooping, Abeka stroked the damp fur, not minding the smell of it. I don't feel safe, Soma said. She looked to her father for help. Must it be indoors with us? She belongs with me, Abeka replied immediately. The stranger lowered his hood. He was middle-aged, with light brown skin and a neatly sculpted beard that only covered the end of his chin. Perhaps I can help. This must all feel confusing. When you awoke today, Abeka, you could not have expected to alter the world's destiny. Where are you from, Zarif? Pujalo asked. A traveller like me hails from all corners, Zarif replied. Are you a green cloak? Abeka felt he had the confidence of a green cloak, if not the garment. I am one of the marked, but I do not wear the green cloak. I'm affiliated with them, but I concentrate on matters relating to the great beasts. Have you heard talk of the battles in southern Nilo? Only rumours, Pujalo said. Foreign invaders. Our concerns of late have involved water and food. These rumours are the groans of a dam about to burst, Zarif said. War will soon overtake not only all of Nilo, but all of Erdos. The fallen beasts are returning. Your daughter summoned one of them. This places her at the centre of the conflict. Pujalo turned toward the leopard with alarm. We thought it looked like, not just looks like, Zarif corrected. Abeka has summoned Uraza. How? Soma whispered, eyes wide and frightened. How is unanswerable, Zarif said. What she does now is the only question. I offer my assistance. You must act swiftly. This leopard will earn Abeka many enemies. What do you suggest? Pujalo asked. She is our new rain dancer and is much needed. Her power, Zarif stated somberly, will bring much more than rain. Abeka frowned. This stranger Zarif clearly had plans for her, and her father seemed eager to hear him. Did he want to be rid of her? Would he act so eager if Soma had summoned this leopard? Zarif rubbed his facial hair with 2 fingers. We have much to do. First things first, you may have noticed that Uraza appears edgy. I suggest you either give the leopard the dead antelope,
or else separate them.
Chapter 3. G. Mei Lin sat on a cushion before her looking-glass, meticulously applying facial paint. She didn't mind letting her handmaidens prepare her for festivals or banquets. But today was important. Today she wanted to look just right. And when you wanted something done right, you did it yourself. After finishing the accents around her eyes, Mei Lin inspected her handiwork. It was a work of art atop a work of art. People always remarked that she was stunning. She had never needed paint on her face to earn compliments, but now she possessed an allure beyond her natural beauty. Anybody could get the pale base and striking lips right, but Mei Lin knew some tricks her handmaidens didn't. How to properly blend the blush in her cheeks, how to use gold flecks near the eyes, and how a hint of imperfection made her hair more appealing. Mei Lin practiced a shy smile, then a delighted smile, followed by a look of surprise, and finally a scowl. Smoothing her hands over her snug silk robes, Mei Lin silently proclaimed her work complete. There came a hesitant tap on the door. "Mistress," called a high voice sweetly, "is everything all right? Can I offer any help?" This was Kusha's polite way of informing her that the Bonding Day celebration was at a standstill. The most important people in the province were waiting on her. "I'm almost ready," Mei Lin answered. "I'll be out in a moment." Mei Lin didn't want to make everyone wait too long, but making them wait a little would ensure that all eyes were on her. The other candidates had sampled the nectar already. Mei Lin would drink it last, in the place of honor. The conventional wisdom was that the last person to drink the nectar had the best chance of summoning a spirit animal. As the daughter of General Teng, one of the 5 high commanders of the Zhongyi's military, Mei Lin had been guaranteed the last spot at the quarterly Bonding Day ceremonies since birth. As his only child, her importance was elevated further. She had no brother to steal her birthright. Her mother had summoned a spirit animal, as had all 4 of Mei Lin's grandparents and all 8 of her great-grandparents. Her father, grandfather, and 2 of her great-grandfathers had been generals. The least of the others had been powerful merchants. Only the family of the emperor could claim a better pedigree. Her father had not called a spirit animal, but even so, had risen higher in the military than any of his ancestors. He was a formidable man. Nobody was more cunning or more observant or more wrathful when crossed. Her father had told her last night that he had foreseen she would summon a spirit animal today. She didn't know whether he had visited a soothsayer or beheld the vision himself, but he had acted certain, and he was never wrong. Mei Lin gathered her parasol. Made of paper and intricately painted, it was strictly ornamental. She placed it over her shoulder and took a final look in the mirror. A heavy fist pounded the door, startling her. This was no handmaiden. "Yes?" Mei Lin called.
"Are you decent?"
a male voice inquired. "Yes." The door opened. It was General Qin, her father's closest aide, wearing his most formal uniform. How late was she? "What is it, General?"
"My apologies for the intrusion,"
he said. He paused, licking his lips. He seemed perturbed, almost unsure how to continue.
"I have unfortunate news. The invasion of Zhong has begun. We must hurry with the ceremony and then move out."
"Invasion?"
"Surely you know about the skirmishes in the southeast."
"Of course." Her father kept few secrets from her, but he had shared no suspicions of a serious threat.
"We just received word that they were but a prelude to a major incursion. Your father had prepared for something of the sort, but our enemies have more men and resources than even General Teng had guessed."
General Qin swallowed.
"The city of Sha Liwao has fallen. We are officially at war."
Mei Lin couldn't speak. She could hardly believe that General Qin was speaking the truth. Sha Liwao was one of the largest cities beyond the wall, an important Zhongyi's port. Was this how wars started? On days that should have been happy?
She suddenly felt ill and wished she could be alone. Her father would be leaving soon. Zhong was powerful, and Erdos had no better general. He should be fine. But her father had described the uncertainties of war. A stray arrow could slay the mightiest hero. In wartime, none were truly safe. The entire city already fell, Mei Lin had to ask.
Yes, reports are still coming in. The attack was lightning quick, an alliance of Zhongyi's rebels and foreign invaders.
I'll skip the ceremony, Mei Lin said. I can do it later.
No, the news just arrived. The public doesn't know yet. We want to keep it that way for now. Don't mention the attack. All must appear calm and normal.
Mei Lin nodded. Fine, I'll do my part. But it's an emergency. Father can go.
He insists you drink the nectar before he leaves.
Mei Lin followed General Qin out of her home. She ignored the questions of her handmaidens who fell into step behind them. Their mansion adjoined the parade grounds, so it was not a long walk to the ceremony. Opening her parasol, Mei Lin strolled down the central aisle toward the stage. Thousands of people craned to see her. General Qin strode at her side, medals gleaming. People cheered. It seemed like an ordinary festive occasion. These people had no clue what news was coming. Near the stage, the bystanders were seated. More money and status meant more convenience and comfort. As Mei Lin approached, even the dignitaries and merchants and government officials arose and applauded. Mei Lin forced the most natural smile she could manage. She gave small nods to faces she recognized. Everything felt brittle, fake. She wondered if the onlookers could see through her facade. A boy at one side of the aisle yelled her name. It was Yenny from her school. His father was a provincial official. He had made no secret of his affection for her, even though he was almost 3 years older. She gave him the shy smile. His face turned red, and he grinned from ear to ear. Mei Lin had never kissed a boy, although plenty had shown interest. She hated feeling like a trophy. Not only was her father rich, not only was he a popular general, but she was also attractive and refined. None of the boys actually knew her. She was just a prize, and there was no way of telling which aspect of the prize they wanted most. She wondered how they would react if they knew her secret. Underneath the facial paint, beneath the expensive silks, she was not the dainty flower they imagined. She knew her manners. She could paint, she could serve tea, she could garden, she could recite poetry, she could sing. But her favorite pastime was hand-to-hand combat. It had started innocently at age 5. Her father was a general and a practical man. He had access to the best warriors in Zhong, and he'd wanted his daughter to learn the basics of defending herself. He had no idea how much aptitude she would demonstrate, nor how much she would enjoy it. The training had gotten more serious each year. All in secret, she became the son her father never had. She could fight with knives, staves, and spears. She could use longbows, crossbows, and slings. But her favorite discipline involved combat using her hands and feet. A scant 6 weeks past her 11th birthday, she could outmaneuver all but the greatest masters. She was slender, but strong. After she reached her adult size, she would be very formidable. Mei Lin hoped that her spirit animal would augment her fighting skills. She knew that all sorts of powers could be derived from a strong relationship with a spirit animal. With the help of the right beast, good warriors became great, and great warriors became legends. What species would benefit her most? Her father called her the tiny tiger. A tiger would be nice. Or maybe a snow leopard. An ox could grant great strength. She tried not to set her heart on something too specific. The crowd watched her enthusiastically. Only the top officials among them knew that war was coming. Soon they would all have much more than nectar ceremonies to demand their attention. When she reached the stage, Mei Lin folded her parasol and passed it to a handmaiden. She saw her father in the front of the crowd, dashing in his uniform, and gave a polite nod. She saw approval in his eyes.
He was admiring her poise. Many caged beasts were positioned on and around the stage, a royal menagerie, including orangutans, tigers, pandas, foxes, alligators, cranes, baboons, pythons, ostriches, oxen, water buffalo, and even a pair of young elephants. Their province usually furnished a broad assortment, but this bonding day boasted the most variety she had seen. Her father had made sure of it. On the stage awaited Sheyu, the leader of the local Greencloaks. He was dressed simply, and since his clouded leopard was not in sight, it was probably in its passive state. If she recalled correctly, he wore the tattoo on his chest. Her father had mixed feelings about the Greencloaks. He respected them, but thought they had too much power and too many foreign ties. He didn't like their monopoly on the nectar and how they used it to remain involved in everyone's affairs around the world. Meilin was privately impressed by them. Her reasons were simple. The armies of Zhong did not invite women into their ranks, but the Greencloaks didn't fuss about such things. They measured people by their ability. Meilin noticed a stranger on the stage. She had a foreign air about her, in both her dress and her features. Her feet were bare. She was short and thin, with that fragile look some men preferred. The feathers in her hair gave her away as an Amayan. An exotic, multicolored bird stood on the stage beside her. Sheyu beckoned Meilin. She went to him, remembering to face the crowd. It always looked amateurish when candidates turned their backs on the audience. In a strident voice, he proclaimed the ceremonial words, the same words he always said. Meilin told herself that if her father was wrong and no spirit animal appeared, she would keep composed. Her father had made his way in the world without one, she could as well. Sheyu held a jade decanter to her lips. Meilin took a sip. The warm fluid was a bitter shock to her tongue. It took some effort to avoid gagging. Instead, she forced herself to smile as she swallowed. For an unsteady moment, Meilin was afraid she would choke on the taste. And then, a fiery heat filled her belly. As the warmth radiated outward, her ears started ringing. The sky was clear, but the sun dimmed. There was a brilliant flash, and she was joined on stage by a black and white panda. It was large for the species, with disturbing silver eyes, just like Ji on the Great Seal of Zhong. The panda trundled over to Meilin and reared up to place its paws against her ribs. The fiery heat instantly drained away. For a moment, Meilin felt profoundly relaxed. She was no longer playing a role in front of a crowd. She was simply herself. She basked in the warmth of the sun and rejoiced in the gentle currents of the air around her. Then the moment slipped away. Meilin stared at her new spirit animal in bewilderment. A giant panda? Nobody called giant pandas, because Ji had been a giant panda, and Ji was a great beast, one of the fallen. A large statue of Ji stood in the far corner of the parade ground, huge and somewhat ridiculous. A panda was basically the opposite of a tiger, more silly and cute than impressive or threatening. What skills would it bestow on a fighter? The ability to eat bamboo? The audience made no sound. Meilin found her father's eyes. He looked shocked. The Amayan woman had come to her side. "I'm Lenore," she said quietly. "I'm here to help you." "Are you a Greencloak?" "I'm not wearing it, but yes. Do you realize what you've done?" "I'm not supposed to be able to summon a panda." "Exactly." Lenore took her hand and raised it high. "Meilin has fulfilled a prophecy that most have forgotten. Ji the Fallen has returned to Erdos. Let us all—" Lenore never finished her sentence, because the alarm bells started to ring, a gonging clamour reserved for emergencies. Meilin scanned the parade ground, alert. Was this connected to the invasion? That made no sense. Sha Li Wao was far away. beyond the wall of Zhong. Just as Mei Lin remembered to guard her expression, the great horns on the city wall sounded 3 times, long, low notes that warned of immediate danger. The audience began to stir and exclaim. Aware that many eyes remained on her, Mei Lin held very still, trying to appear undisturbed. This was no practice exercise. The horns confirmed that. Something was horribly wrong. Did she smell smoke? It was hard to see much beyond the high walls of the parade ground. Then, the screaming began. Toward the rear of the parade ground, beyond the carefully monitored seats of the dignitaries, fighting broke out. Men and women flung off cloaks, many summoning spirit animals. Swords and axes began to cut down bystanders. As people pressed to get away, a bull charged through the crowd. A trio of arrows curved through the air to thunk down on the stage. Mei Lin ignored the arrows, even though one landed close enough to kick it. The invasion was supposed to be far away, beyond the wall. She had heard of riots in some of the outlying towns before, but nothing like that had ever happened in Janorion. It was a model city, one of the mightiest in all of Zhong. With a flash, Xie released his spirit animal. The clouded leopard gave a savage cry. Xie pulled on a glove fitted with 4 sharp blades. With his other hand, he seized Mei Lin by the upper arm, giving a yank to start her moving. "They must have come for you!" he yelled. As she stumbled after him toward the rear of the stage, Mei Lin craned to see the parade ground. Guards were engaging the rebels. Spear met sword, axe met shield. Some weapons found their mark. Men and women screamed. Mei Lin knew much about battle through her father, but until now she had never seen anyone killed. In a few brief seconds, she saw death, and more of it than she could handle. Her last glimpse, before she jumped off the stage beside Xie, was of Kusha, her chief handmaiden, falling to her knees with an arrow buried in her back. Mei Lin's father was there to steady her. General Qin waited at his side, along with Lenori. "Hurry," her father urged. "We must get to the tower. We need to survey the city." The words roused her. "Right," she said, glancing back just in time to see her panda jump gracelessly from the stage. At least Ji appeared unharmed. Would Kusha die from that arrow? It had looked bad. Her father ran toward the door behind the stage. Mei Lin followed, with Xie nearby. From one side, several armed rebels raced to block their retreat. A large dog ran with them, and a red panda, and an ibex with tall back-swept horns. Generals Teng and Qin drew their swords at the same time. Veering away from the door, they met the rebels violently. Pulling on a second clawed glove, Xie rushed to join them. Mei Lin wanted to help, but she was unarmed, and the enemies had weapons. She looked around frantically for a weapon, but found none. General Qin and her father engaged the enemy with the same poise they used on the practice floor. They worked in tandem, deflecting attacks, dispatching foes, and pivoting to lend each other assistance. Xie and his clouded leopard ducked and weaved among the rebels, narrowly dodging attacks and efficiently slashing opponents. Lenori dragged Mei Lin to the door. Ji stayed near her. As a second group of rebels approached, Xie and the generals fell back. With blood flowing freely from his shoulder, General Qin opened the door with a key. "Hurry!" he cried. The group streamed through, and General Qin locked the door behind them. Mei Lin's father took off at a run, leading them along the hallway within the parade ground wall. Mei Lin stayed right behind him. The thick walls muffled the tumult from the parade ground, so their footfalls echoed loudly. Glancing over her shoulder, Mei Lin saw Lenori's bird hopping and fluttering along. The panda brought up the rear, hurrying just enough to stay close. Mei Lin could tell where her father was headed. The lookout station at the corner of the parade ground offered one of the highest vantages of Janorion. They would be able to see most of the city and much beyond. It was the quickest way for him to assess the situation. As they raced along the hallway, Mei Lin resisted asking questions. Had they been alone, it would have been different, but in mixed company, her father would volunteer information as he desired. The soldiers at the base of the lookout tower straightened and saluted as her father drew near. He gave a quick salute back and climbed onto the lifter. "What is that?" Lenori asked hesitantly.
An ingenious device, Sheyu explained. Counterweights will raise the platform to the top of the tower.
They all stepped onto the platform. The panda showed no hesitation. Mei Lin stared into those silver eyes as the lifter rose briskly. Despite the chaos around them, the panda appeared serene and disturbingly knowing. Mei Lin looked away first. When the lifter reached the top, Mei Lin's father hustled them out onto the observation terrace. Soldiers with telescopes paused to salute.
"Carry on,"
her father said. The ranking officer approached, but her father waved him away, preferring to use his own faculties to assess the situation. Mei Lin stood beside him, eyes wide, hardly believing what she was seeing. Janorion was under attack. The capital of the province and one of the largest cities in Zhong had battles raging within and without. A huge host charged the city walls, rushing across the plain like a flood. Rebels swept through clusters of defenders trying to organize themselves. Many ran alongside animals, others rode animals. They carried swords and spears, maces and axes. Where had they come from? Why had there been no warning? The city was burning. Black smoke billowed up from at least a dozen locations that Mei Lin could see. The old academy where she attended classes was aflame. That ancient building had stood for centuries. Her ancestors had studied there, and now Mei Lin watched it fall. Fierce skirmishes came in and out of view down on the streets. Mei Lin craned to see, but buildings and trees blocked much of the action. Mei Lin's heart squeezed as she glanced up at her father's stoic face. She could tell he was shocked, but he hid it well. Those who did not know him intimately might not recognize how deeply he was stunned. He held out a hand for a telescope. Raising it to one eye, he focused on a few areas beyond the city wall, then a few within.
"So many have spirit animals,"
he murmured. General Qin had his own spyglass.
"Unprecedented. There hasn't been an army like this since the Devourer," her father finished.
Mei Lin blinked. The Devourer was a legend from the past, a monster in nursery stories. Why would her father mention him at a time like this?
"Where did they all come from?" Sheyu asked. "How could that army have gotten past the wall of Zhong without a single guard noticing?"
Mei Lin looked to her father. She had wanted to pose the same question.
"They wear no uniforms," he said. "They didn't win through by force. They must have trickled in, perhaps over years. Many look Zhongese, but not all. It staggers me to consider the logistics involved. I would have named an attack of this scale impossible, yet here they are. The strength of Zhong is concentrated far from here, along our outer wall. Many soldiers now travel toward Shaliwao, but that was evidently a diversion." "What must we do?" General Qin asked. "We will do our duty," General Teng said. He raised his voice. "Leave us!"
The other soldiers abandoned the observation terrace. Sheyu took Lenori by the arm and turned to go.
"Not you, green cloaks,"
General Teng said, his voice a quiet growl. He kept a hand on Mei Lin's shoulder, so she knew he wanted her there as well. Sheyu and Lenori drew closer. Mei Lin watched her father. His expression made her uncomfortable. She tried to suppress the fear gnawing inside.
"Janorion will fall," he said plainly. "We don't have enough defenders here to resist. Lenori, you claim that Mei Lin has summoned Ji herself, the living symbol of Zhong. What does it mean? What do you propose?"
"I wish to bring her to our commander," Lenori said. "Ji is not the first of the Four Fallen to return in recent weeks. This war is coming to all of Erdos. We mean to reunite the Four Fallen and fight. It's our only chance." Mei Lin felt the hand on her shoulder tighten. Her father gave a single nod.
"So be it. Lenori, take my daughter. This is no place for her at present. Sheyu, please see that they embark safely from the port at Jinkao Dai."
Sheyu placed a fist to his chest and inclined his head.
"It would be my honor."
"Father, I don't want to go," Mei Lin cried. "Please let me stay with you. Please let me defend our home."
"It is not safe for you."
"Where would I be safer than with the greatest general in all of Erdos?"
"And," he continued, holding up a hand to stay her. "You may have vital duties elsewhere."
He crouched to look her straight in the eyes.
"Mei Lin, visit with this Green Cloak commander. Hear him out. If he talks sense and the path feels true, lend the aid that duty requires. If not, seek a better path. In either instance, do not forget who you are or where you come from."
"But—" General Teng shook his head.
"This is my will."
Mei Lin knew that the conversation was over. Her fate had been decided. Hot tears stung her eyes. She looked out at the army charging toward her home, then down at the ravaging traitors already at work in the parade ground. How could she run away, leaving her father to face this threat, his army divided and already half defeated? She glanced over at Ji. The panda returned her gaze with understanding and perhaps a hint of pity. Was she imagining the empathy in those penetrating eyes? Mei Lin stared at the ground. She didn't need understanding. She needed strength. Not only did this panda have little chance of improving her combat skills, it was also the reason the Greencloaks were taking her away. Away from her home. Away from her father. A clamour arose from the stairwell. An injured soldier staggered to the top of the stairs.
"They're coming up! There's too many!"
Mei Lin's father gave a nod.
"Hold them as long as you can."
The soldier turned and hobbled back down the stairs. Unseen weapons clashed. An animal screamed. Moving to the top of the stairs, General Qin drew his sword. Mei Lin's father pulled the levers that lowered the lifter, then gestured to a ladder that descended the interior of the shaft.
"Climb down to the first access tunnel. It should allow you to slip by the rebels. Get out of the city."
Mei Lin couldn't hold back her worries. "What about—" Her father sliced his hand through the air and silenced her.
"General Qin and I will confirm you reach the tunnel, then we'll make our escape."
He gave his daughter a strained smile.
"I won't let this rabble take me. Go."
There was no room for argument. Mei Lin would not shame him with further pleas or disagreements. Mei Lin raised her eyes to his. "As you wish, father." The others were already heading down the ladder. She was mildly astonished to find Ji capable of descending unaided. As Mei Lin placed her foot on the first rung, General Qin engaged his first foe. Just before her head passed down into the shaft, she saw General Qin and her father backing up, swords flashing, pressed by numerous opponents. She kept silent. If the enemies noticed her descent, her father's efforts would be in vain. Maybe he would still get away. He was a cunning man. With tears blurring her vision, Mei Lin joined the others in the cramped tunnel. Taking her hand, Yu led the way. Chapter 4. Essex. Roland loitered on the corner by the apothecary, keeping his back to the store. Down the cobbled street, between buildings with thick plaster walls and rounded facades, Smarty and Red were looking his way. Roland tried to convey with his eyes that they shouldn't draw attention to him. They got the message and faced elsewhere. An orphan since age 5, Roland knew that stealing was part of survival. Even so, he avoided it whenever possible. He had no problem with claiming leftovers since the owners were done with them. People with money abandoned all sorts of things. Roland had found clever ways to lay claim to unfinished meals and discarded clothing. That was salvaging, not thievery. But his current problem would not be solved through scrounging. There was no such thing as leftover willow extract. It was too valuable. He and the boys used to have some, thanks to Hans, but it had run out. And now Digger had a terrible fever. They had wasted the precious medicine on less serious sicknesses. Had they known this was coming, they would have saved some, but it was too late. They wouldn't be in this mess if Hans hadn't gotten arrested. The boy had a gift for pilfering, and life had been much more comfortable with him around. But Hans got greedy and started going after real valuables. The militia caught him and locked him up. Roland glanced over his shoulder at the apothecary. As with many businesses in town, a banner emblazoned with Essex the Falcon, patron beast of Amaya, hung over the entrance.
Digger really needed help. He was burning up and it kept getting worse. Without medicine, he could die. Folding his arms, Roland scowled at the ground. He didn't like to steal, but it wasn't out of deep respect for the law. Many of the profiteers in Concorba made their fortunes on the backs of the poor, taking everything they could from people who had almost nothing, and the laws protected that system. Stealing was just too risky. When kids got caught taking even the smallest thing, the penalties were harsh, especially as you got older. Plus, he had his honor. His own version of it anyway, never to take from the poor, never from the sick or infirm, and always to try other alternatives first. The other boys teased Roland for his reluctance to pinch things. They had tried to nickname him Justice, but he had forcefully declined. Actually, he had dodged all of their attempted nicknames, which was why he was the only guy in the group without one. No matter how he looked at it, stealing from the apothecary would be difficult. The owner had an unfriendly reputation. His employees were vigilant, and they turned troublemakers over to the militia. Roland had warned the others not to go after the extract. Hans could have managed it, but nobody else had a fraction of his skill. Roland wasn't above asking for help. Begging had been good to him. Certain bakeries and inns didn't mind handing over stale bread or other unwanted food. But times were hard, and getting harder. Amaya was a young continent, much of it still untamed, and even in a big town like Concorba, if a harvest went poorly or if pirates harassed the importers, pretty soon everyone felt the squeeze. Those at the bottom of the pecking order felt it the worst. There wasn't time to beg for enough money to buy the extract. Roland had decided he would swipe it if he could. After all, the life of a friend outweighed some rule. But after casing the store, he didn't think success was possible. Should he try anyway? Roland had asked for help from everywhere that made sense, except at the apothecary. Unlikely as that option seemed, it might be more fruitful than the alternative. Steeling himself, he went inside. The owner, Eloy Valdez, stood behind the counter in a white apron. He had bushy grey sideburns and a receding hairline. His eyes locked on Roland, who always drew attention when he entered a business. Even in his best clothes, he was too young and too scruffy. Roland walked directly to the owner.
"Good afternoon, Mr. Valdez."
Roland tried on his brightest smile. He knew beneath the grime he was a handsome kid, with his dark tousled hair and tan skin, but there was a lot of grime.
"Hello, boy," the man replied, his gaze suspicious. "Can I help you?"
"Not me so much as a friend,"
Roland said.
"He has a horrible fever. This is the 3rd day and it keeps getting worse. I'm an orphan, him too. He needs willow extract. I don't have money, but I can work hard, help tidy up, whatever you need."
Mr. Valdez made the "I wish I could help you" face Roland had seen so often.
"That's an expensive remedy, and it's in short supply these days, making it more costly still."
"I don't mind putting in a lot of work,"
Roland offered. Mr. Valdez sucked air through his teeth.
"You know how times are. My 2 assistants already take care of everything. I have no spare chores and plenty of qualified men waiting for a vacancy. Sorry."
Roland's cheeks burned with shame, but Digger needed him.
"Maybe you could get creative, to help stop a kid from dying."
"You want charity,"
Mr. Valdez said knowingly.
"I'm afraid I have a strict no charity policy. Medicines are pricey. If your friend were the only soul in town who couldn't pay, I'd surely lend a hand. But endless people have desperate needs and no money. If I give you a free remedy, I should provide for all the others as well. I'd be out of business in a week."
"I won't tell anyone where it came from," Roland promised. "You might not be able to help everyone, but you can help him. Please, Mr. Valdez. He's got nobody."
"Secrets like free willow extract don't keep,"
Mr. Valdez said.
"Besides, your tale may be true, but some such stories might not be. How am I supposed to tell the difference? I can't help you. Good day.
Roland had been dismissed. What options were left? If he returned after this, Mr. Valdez would study his every move. Stealing the extract was no longer a possibility.
How would you feel if you were alone in some alley, sick, no place to go, and everyone ignored you?
That's why I don't live on the streets,
Mr. Valdez said.
That's why I worked hard to get where I am, and why I intend to stay here. The needs of an urchin are not my obligation.
Hard work doesn't always get you off the streets, Roland said, frustration surging through him. It won't always keep you off them either. What if your store burned down?
Mr. Valdez narrowed his eyes.
Is that a threat?
Roland raised both hands.
No, I just mean bad luck can strike anywhere.
Aldo,
Mr. Valdez called.
This person needs help finding the door.
The cause was lost. Roland decided he could stop licking Mr. Valdez's boots.
You need help finding a heart. I hope you catch something without a remedy, something besides old age.
A large man with his sleeves rolled back over thick, hairy arms strode in from the back of the store. He came straight toward Roland. Behind him, Smarty ducked behind the apothecary counter.
How had Smarty gotten in here? Through the back door? What was he thinking?
His nickname was a joke, not a compliment. He was going to get them both busted. Roland tried not to stare at his friend. Instead, he watched Aldo approach.
You thick,
Aldo barked.
Beat it!
Roland sidled toward the door, trying not to move too quickly. He needed to get out of there, but if he ran off, Smarty would get nabbed for sure. Aldo closed the distance, seized Roland roughly by the back of his neck, and marched him toward the doorway.
Don't let us catch you in here again, the big man warned.
Aldo!
Mr. Valdez cried. Looking back, Roland saw Smarty speeding toward the back of the store.
He took a packet of willow extract,
Mr. Valdez shouted.
Santos!
Aldo dragged Roland toward the rear of the store.
Get back here, or your friend gets it, the big man yelled.
Smarty never glanced back. By the time Aldo reached the back door, Smarty was out of sight.
Santos!
Mr. Valdez cried, joining them.
Where's Santos? On that errand, remember?
Aldo said. Mr. Valdez turned furious eyes on Roland.
All that talk about working to pay off the debt. You were setting me up while your accomplice snuck in here. Very low, even for scum.
He did it on his own,
Roland insisted.
Save it, kid, Aldo said. You helped steal the goods. You'll do the time.
Roland kicked out at Aldo's knee, but the big man took it without a flinch. Roland could feel the strength of the hand on his neck.
Your next appointment is with the militia, Mr. Valdez said.
Roland knew there was no point in arguing. At least Digger would get his remedy. The city militia kept a line of cells in the basement of their headquarters. Mildew thrived on the damp walls, and ancient straw littered the discoloured stone floor. The interior barriers were composed of iron bars, allowing the prisoners to see each other. Roland sat on a decaying wicker mat. Men occupied 3 of the other cells. One man was sickly and gaunt. Another had slept since Roland arrived, and the third looked like the sort Roland had learned to avoid. He was probably in here for something serious. A guard had informed Roland that he would go before a judge tomorrow. He was young enough that they might send him back to the orphanage. The thought gave him shivers. There was no worse racket than the orphanage in Concorba. The head guy lived well because he fed the kids the absolute minimum, made them work like slaves, dressed them like beggars, and never wasted resources on things like medicine. Roland had run off for a reason. He suspected he might actually prefer prison. A door opened, and boots clomped down the stairs. Were they bringing in a new prisoner? Roland arose for a better look. No, the jailer was alone. He was portly with a stubbly jaw. Holding a ledger, he came to Roland's cell.
How old are you?
Was this a trick question? Would it
benefit him more to seem older or younger? Roland wasn't sure, so he answered honestly.
I'm 12 next month.
The man made a notation.
You're an orphan.
Actually, I'm a lost prince. If you take me back to Yora, my father will reward you.
When did you run away from the orphanage?
Roland considered the question and found no reason to fib.
I was 9.
Have you had your nectar?
The question mildly surprised him.
No.
You know what happens if you don't take the nectar?
Bonding could happen naturally.
That's right. It's against our town statutes not to drink the nectar within 3 months of turning 11.
Good thing I'm already behind bars. Want some advice? You guys should make a law against 11-year-olds dying because they have no medicine.
The jailer harumphed.
This is no game, boy.
Does it sound like a game? Roland said. Have you ever played dying alone of a fever because willow bark costs too much? Look, just add my lack of nectar to my list of charges. For the record, nobody ever offered me any.
The militia gives nectar to any children of age who haven't received it.
You guys deserve more medals, Roland said.
The jailer held up a scolding finger.
If you have the potential to summon a spirit animal, it'll happen on its own by age 12 or 13. But do you know what could happen to you without the nectar? The bond is a gamble. Drives some people mad, others to illness. Some die on the spot, others are fine.
But with the nectar, it's always stable, Roland said.
The great beasts may not have done much for us lately, but we'll always owe Ninani for the nectar. But to benefit, you have to use it.
Roland huffed.
What are the chances I'd call an animal? Like 100 to 1? Less?
The jailer ignored him.
I know a green cloak who tends to orphans. I'll send her around by and by.
The jailer turned and climbed the stairs. Roland stretched, pivoting at the waist, then raising his hands high.
I didn't expect a show today, said the gaunt man in the farthest cell. What do you think you'll call?
Nothing, Roland said.
I thought the same, the gaunt man said. I was wrong. I called a hedgehog.
You're a green cloak?
Roland asked, surprised. The gaunt man snorted. His eyes looked lost, his posture exhausted.
You see any cloak? My animal got killed. The absence left me. I wish I'd lost a limb instead.
An hour later, maybe 2, the jailer returned with a couple of uniformed militiamen and a green cloak. She was in her late teens and of medium height. Her face wasn't very pretty, but it was kind. The jailer unlocked the cell gate and beckoned for Roland to step out. One of the militiamen held a small cage with a rat inside. Exiting the cell, Roland nodded at the rat.
Is that a joke?
They say folks bond more easily if animals are present, the militiaman said with a jeering smile. We caught him a couple years back. He's our mascot.
Very funny, Roland said dryly.
Should we hunt for some spiders? Maybe a cockroach?
People don't bond with insects, the green cloak said, although there is some precedence for summoning arachnids.
I'll bet a copper piece he calls nothing,
said the prisoner who Roland thought looked like trouble. The man patted his pockets.
Wait, 2.
He produced them.
Any takers?
Nobody agreed to the bet.
Should we do it?
Roland suggested, breaking the awkward silence. For some kids, the summoning ceremony was a big deal. They got all dressed up with their families. Spectators attended, lectures were given, refreshments served. He was in a dirty jail with a rat, his guards and his fellow prisoners. He just wanted to get it over with. The green cloak produced a simple flask. She uncapped it and held it out to him. Only takes a swallow.
That was quite a speech, Roland said, accepting the flask. Your talents are wasted in dank basements. You're ready to work above ground.
He took a sip. There was a restaurant that sometimes gave him sweetened cinnamon toast, his favourite treat. The nectar tasted sort of like that, but liquefied. Roland wiped his lips. As the green cloak reached for her flask,
Roland swayed. Sparks zinged through his body. What was going on? He held out the flask, but his arm felt unsteady. The green cloak took the flask, and Roland dropped to his knees. "What's wrong with me?" Roland slurred. The entire jail rumbled and the room grew dark. Or was his vision failing? A blinding light appeared, lingered for a moment, and then vanished. A falcon had joined them in the room, large and powerful, the feathers a brownish gold with white speckles on the breast. With a flurry of wings, the raptor leaped up to Roland's shoulder. When the claws pinched into his skin, the sparking sensation ceased. The others stared, dumbfounded. For a moment, Roland's eyes seemed unusually keen. He was able to see the porous textures of the stone floor and walls. He spotted a spider hiding amid the wafting cobwebs in a high corner, and felt the startled moods of those around him with abnormal clarity. And then, all of a sudden, he was back to normal. "It's a falcon!" the green cloak marvelled. "A gerfalcon with amber eyes."
"She's a falcon," Roland clarified. "She's a girl." "How do you know that?" the jailer asked.
Roland paused.
"I just do."
"She would be female, I suppose," the green cloak murmured. Seeming to snap out of a trance, she stared at Roland searchingly. "How is this possible? Who are you?"
"Just some orphan," Roland said.
"There has to be more to it than that," she muttered, half to herself.
"I'm also a criminal," Roland volunteered. "The worst kind of criminal, actually."
"What kind is that?" the green cloak asked.
"The kind who got caught," Roland replied.
The green cloak glanced at the jailer. "Put him back in his cell. I'll be back."
"The bird too?"
the jailer asked. "Naturally," the green cloak replied. "It's his spirit animal."
"Guess it was my lucky day," mumbled the seedy prisoner. "Nobody took my bet. I get to keep my coppers."
It was not long before the jailer escorted a man to Roland's cell. The stranger looked like some sort of foreign lord. He wore high boots, leather gauntlets, a fancy sword, and an embroidered blue cloak that Roland guessed cost more than a team of horses. The man had a neatly trimmed beard on his chin and gazed at Roland with interest.
"Would you like to get out of here, Roland?"
the man asked.
"I might miss the itchy mat and the black stuff that rubs off the bars," Roland said. "Sometimes we don't appreciate what we have until we lose it."
The man smiled, but with the hint of a sneer.
"Why isn't your cloak green?" Roland asked.
"My name is Duke Zarif," the man said. "I work with the Green Cloaks, but I'm not one of them. They send me to help with cases like yours."
"Cases like mine?"
Zarif glanced at the jailer.
"Better if we converse in private. I've paid your bail."
"Fine with me,"
Roland said. The jailer opened the cell door. Roland stepped out, the bird on his shoulder, and exited with Zarif, never glancing at the other prisoners, not saying a word to anyone. What did this guy want? When they reached the street, Zarif looked over at him.
"That is a superior bird."
"Thanks,"
Roland grunted.
"What now?"
"Today, your new life begins,"
Zarif said.
"We have much to discuss."
"Bail isn't a pardon. What about Mr. Valdez?"
"The charges will be dropped. I'll take care of it."
Roland gave a slight nod.
"What about the girl who gave me the nectar? Where is she?"
Zarif flashed a cocky grin.
"These matters exceed her expertise. You are no longer her assignment. Come."
The falcon gave Roland's shoulder a brief, painful squeeze with her talons. Despite her weight, Roland had nearly forgotten her presence. Something about the timing of the squeeze and the way Zarif had spoken about the girl made Roland uneasy.
"Is she all right?"
Did a trace of admiration creep into Zarif's grin?
"I'm sure she's fine."
He was lying, and Roland knew it. Zarif even seemed to respect that Roland suspected him.
Roland felt a disturbing certainty that Zarif had done something to the green cloak. Just who was this guy? Zarif hurried them down the street.
"Where are we going?"
Roland asked.
"A quiet place to talk. Then far away from here, if you like. Have you ever yearned to see the world? That bird is your ticket."
The falcon shrieked loud enough to hurt Roland's ears. Zarif's eyes darted between the bird and Roland, his smile faltering a bit.
"She doesn't like you,"
Roland realized.
"She's just testing her voice," Zarif answered. "I mean you no harm."
Roland would have bet 2 coppers that he was lying. His response had almost sounded relaxed, but Zarif was definitely acting. And he was wearing a large sword.
"What is that woman doing?"
Roland asked, pointing across the street. As Zarif turned to look, Roland ran. They had passed an alley, and he turned and sprinted down it. Halfway along the alley, Roland risked a glance back and saw Zarif in pursuit, blue cloak flapping behind him. The man had jerked his sleeve back, and the mark on his forearm flashed. A canine creature landed in front of him, already running. What was it? A coyote? Roland had hoped that the lordly stranger would be above chasing him. Apparently not. But the coyote proved that Zarif was one of the marked. Maybe he was a green cloak after all. Still, Roland didn't trust him, and neither did the bird. He needed to ditch him fast. Roland had some experience escaping down alleyways. He ran hard and extended his hands to topple crates and rubbish bins into the path of his pursuers. In spite of his efforts, he could hear them gaining. Visions of coyote teeth and the thought of Zarif's expensive sword impelled him to run faster. Rounding a corner, Roland raced into another alley. He passed an occasional door, not daring to try it in case it was locked, or that whoever lay beyond might not aid him. He had learned the hard way that an orphan in flight had few friends. He glanced up, looking for a way up to the rooftops, but there was nothing in view. The man and the coyote kept gaining. Ahead, on the left, Roland saw a fence between buildings. He jumped, grabbed the splintery top of it, and kicked one leg over. With a snarl, the coyote leaped for his dangling leg. Teeth tore through his pant leg and scraped his skin, nearly yanking him from the wall.
"Come down from there,"
Zarif ordered, racing forward with his sword drawn. Roland rolled over the top of the fence and fell into a weedy lot with a shanty in one corner. A ragged man glared at him unwelcomingly from the shadows of his hovel. Springing to his feet, Roland dashed across the lot. As he approached the fence on the far side, Roland glanced back. The coyote streaked across the lot toward him, but there was no sign of Zarif. Had he tossed his spirit animal over the fence? Roland scanned the scraggly ground ahead as he ran for something to use as a weapon, but saw nothing. The coyote was closing in. He knew he would barely win the race to the fence. No way would he get up and over without getting mauled. When Roland reached the fence, he jumped and grabbed the top with both hands as if he meant to climb, then turned in midair to kick the coyote, springing at him square in the muzzle. The blow connected cleanly, and the coyote hit the ground with a yelp. Roland was up the fence and over before the animal had recovered. The alley he landed in was wider. As he debated which direction to go, Zarif shot around a far corner, running with superhuman speed. Roland couldn't run half as fast as Zarif was moving. Zarif had gone around most of the block in the time it had taken Roland to cross the lot. Roland had heard stories about the powers the marked could receive from their bonds. How could he escape from someone like that? He turned and ran the opposite way. Racing around another corner, Roland found himself sprinting toward a large man in a forest green cloak astride a moose. There was no time to digest the bizarre sight. The moose barreled toward him, its massive antlers spanning almost the full width of the alley. The grey-haired man astride it had a thick build and a fleshy face framed by a bristly beard. He clutched a mace in one hand. A mail shirt jangled under his cloak.
"Out of my way, boy!"
the green cloak bellowed. Lunging sideways, Roland flattened himself against the wall of the alley as the moose charged past. He heard a shriek above him and the scrape of talons on metal as his bird landed on the roof. Zarif and the coyote bolted around the corner, skidding to a halt when they saw the oncoming moose. The green cloak gave a battle cry and raised his mace. Zarif shouldered through the first door he reached, probably the back entrance to some business. The green cloak paused for a moment, as if about to give chase, before he rode back to Roland.
"What name did he give?" he barked. "That guy, Zarif." "That much was true. Do you know him?" "I just met him. He bailed me out of jail."
The man dismounted.
"What did he tell you?"
"Not much," Roland said. "He wanted to take me away."
"I expect he did," the man said. "We call Zarif the Jackal, after his spirit animal, a cunning creature native to Nilo. He works for our arch-enemy, the Devourer."
"The Devourer?"
Roland said. It seemed so improbable he almost choked.
"Are you serious? Who are you?"
"My name is Olvan."
Roland glanced at the huge moose and back again. No way. It couldn't be.
"The Olvan?"
he said, shocked into a whisper.
"If by that you mean the worldwide commander of the Green Cloaks, then yes, the Olvan."
The gerfalcon shrieked and swooped down to land on Roland's shoulder. Roland reached up to stroke her feathers. He paused a long moment before he spoke.
"Suddenly, everyone wants to be my friend. Both of you showed up so quickly. Is this about my falcon?"
"She is not your falcon, son. She is the falcon."
Olvan let the words sink in.
"You have summoned Essex back into the world."
Chapter 5. Training. Abeka sat on the edge of a feather bed. Her room had a carved desk, an elaborate sofa, cushioned chairs, and a mirror framed in what she thought might be real gold, all for her personal use. Everyone she encountered treated her respectfully, and a servant delivered tasty meals. Her leopard had turned her into royalty. The room gently rocked from side to side. To think such luxury was available on a ship! Abeka would not have believed it had she not seen it. She appreciated the courteous treatment, but did not feel comfortable in the fancy room. It was too different from home. There were no familiar faces, or even familiar ways. Zarif had not joined her on the voyage. At the dock, he had explained that urgent matters called him elsewhere, and entrusted her in the care of a stranger, a boy named Shane. After everything she had lost, the extra separation had stung. Less than a week earlier, Zarif had convinced her father that Abeka needed to leave Okai, not just for her personal safety, but for the good of the village. Pojalo had promptly agreed.